Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I found out that my base is still there. This last moon episode was one of the more successful episodes, and I dig that. So obviously, I just touched on some pieces of evidence, and of course, watching the video back, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more. There's so much more to talk about. So I'm going to go back and elaborate on some of the stuff I said to clear up some things. Then we're just going to keep going. So hopefully you're ready to go. If this is your first video, Deep Thoughts video, I cover the moon missions, how they didn't occur. I have some privileged information. You may want to start on the video that just happened before this one. It's called Moon Hoax Recap 2024. You can go to the website, deepthoughtsradio.com. Should be generally towards the front of the website when this one comes out. This is sort of an advanced course on other things. So if you're disputing it in your brain, you don't want this one as your first one, unless you're pretty open-minded, which hopefully you are. So I picked on I just want to throw a bunch of Chotskys out there. I picked on the fact that when the lunar module top half blasts off and goes into to go rendezvous with the service module. Remember, the service module's hauling butt. There's no way on Earth, no way on the moon, that top half could ever accelerate to match the service module. Plus, when you ask a pilot, when I look at the maps of all the planes that are flying in the sky, how come you guys don't hit each other? And they always look at you and they say, because there's a lot of space up there. So the idea that this thing is even going to find the service module is ridiculous. It would potentially be, there's a velocity difference between going straight up with almost zero speed relative to the ground. Your aeronautical speed is almost zero. And that service module, it's been estimated as low as 3,500 miles an hour, or its original speed, which would be around 17,000 to 25,000 miles an hour. So it would be so fast you couldn't touch it. You just couldn't. All the footage proves that this ground is moving underneath that both modules as they rendezvous with each other. But something occurred to me, which is, that when you shoot something, especially if it didn't have gravity, just 0.001% off of the angle of what you're trying to hit, the further it's away, you're miles away from the target, which is why getting to Mars is impossible. We don't have any engines that could correct its course in the vacuum of space. So whatever we shot in that direction, if you could even escape Earth's gravity, which we're also going to get into, it wouldn't hit it. So we talked about the fact that when the lunar lander, lands on the moon, there's a little bit of cockeyedness, right? Most of them are almost perfectly flat, but I showed you some photographs of each one of the mission landing points. And, there's a couple and they're just a little cockeyed, a little bit here and there. But it would be, wouldn't it? Because the ground's not going to be paved like a parking lot, and it's not going to be level from surveyors making sure the parking lot's level. Okay? So it's cockeyed. And then you just blast straight up into the air. But you're going to blast off perpendicular to your four-legged kickstand. So you're going to be potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles away from this thing when it comes zipping by for you to rendezvous with it. And depending on how you're oriented, you could be going backwards, you could be going forwards, you could be going east and west. You wouldn't even be in the vector of straight in the line. Remember, you have to go, if you want to even help yourself, you'd have to tilt the thing in the direction of the service module's path so you could at least go up and maybe give yourself some false forward momentum. When I talked about the service module being in any type of geocentric orbit with the moon, the problem with that theory is it was moving when it let go of the lunar module. And that lunar module's falling down to the moon, which is not going to deaccelerate at all until that rocket plume from the bottom of the lunar module, keep reversing them, starts to touch the surface of the moon. Well, that means you're going to be really way off base by the time this thing lands. So where would the service module be if it was in geocentric orbit with the with the surface. That way it might be able to go straight down, but it didn't. You saw the moon zooming by as they let go of each other and as they rendezvoused. More evidence it's all BS, right? Let's talk about leaving Earth's orbit. What have they always told you about leaving Earth's orbit? Well, when I was a kid, I don't remember ever reading about the slingshot theory. But that's the big thing now, the slingshot theory. That's how we're supposedly sending probes out to other planets. And what do they show you? They show you this concentric circle of an ellipsis that keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And of course, as it collapses down to center, down towards the planet, it's accelerating incredibly. But it's already being sent out there, again, 17,000 miles an hour to 25,000 miles an hour. It's all BS, but whatever. I don't care if it's 10,000 miles an hour. If you were to get in some sort of slingshot orbit around Jupiter, this massive ball in space, and you start zooming down, it's the vortex math, okay? The vortex gets faster and faster. Some of the cutting-edge theories about traveling faster than the speed of light, which is very simple to do, our proteins fold twice the speed of light. Just ask Dr. Panjay at Stanford University. You're going to get, what Princeton University did was they actually did, and Cornell worked together, and they came up with a theory of trying to trap light in a vortex, and it's going to get faster and faster and faster as the golden mean satisfies itself, and then boom, you can go a little bit faster than the speed of light. And that's just official science, which is largely full of it, right? But you have to create one of those when you're leaving Earth. You don't get to inherit your speed and the orbital gravity of a body in space. And again, I'm just regurgitating their theories. It technically makes, theoretical sense that you could throw something out there and overshoot the moon, but you still have the moon's gravity. As long as you're not going too fast, the moon will grab you, and then you have to kind of wind down to the point where you're in some orbit around the moon. But some sort of engine is going to have to keep you from crashing into the surface, because that's where you're headed. And that's a whole lot of force. I don't know what the math would be. If you started at 10,000 miles an hour when you hit an orbit of Jupiter, what's it going to be after 8, 10, 12 rotations? It should be faster than 10,000 miles an hour because you're getting slingshotted down into it. Okay. So how do you reverse that process to leave the Earth? You need an engine. One, you need an engine to talk to the vacuum of space, which I don't think we've developed above ground. That doesn't exist. And you're going to have to, every single time you go around the Earth, you're going to have to basically be firing the engine the whole time. You have to. There's nothing going to be automatic. Because those giant ellipses that collapse when you go into a body that you've caught on the other side, you're going to have to manufacture that on the first attempt, which means you're going to have to put a lot of effort in to beat that gravitational force of Earth and keep pushing. And maybe you'll let go of it when you're coming around the corner, and you got to push again, and you're going to have to do it. Otherwise, you're going to lose your ellipsis getting bigger, and eventually you're going to crash into Earth. Saturn V platform doesn't even account for that. All the little drawings we were shown as children, and a lot of the animations that are online show the Saturn V taking off. Of course, it immediately goes over the ocean, and then it's supposedly going into low orbit. NASA claimed that before we went to the moon, we only went about 199 miles up. I had this analogy, and for those of you who went back and watched the Bart Sibrel interview, I gave the analogy, and I've given it a long time ago, but I'm going to repeat this so you understand how utterly ridiculous the claim is. The metric system, which we don't use in America, we use the imperial system in America, has a centimeter. The average height of a wall in an American home is 8 feet from the ground. Well, I discovered that if you take an 8-foot ceiling and you divide it by centimeters, you generally get about 230 some and change centimeters. So what's cool about that is if the moon is truly, let's say, 236,000 miles away on average, right? The Overlook Hotel would say 237. You can stack these up and you're right there at the ceiling. 1 centimeter is 1,000 miles. But the cool thing about a centimeter is it's divisible by 10. 10 millimeters make a centimeter. Cool, right? So what we're saying is that for Apollo 7, let's just say, it went up 2 millimeters. 200 miles. 2 millimeters off the ground. So just look at any wall in any room that you're sitting in and look down and stare at 2 millimeters off the ground. Could you even conceive of 2 millimeters off the ground? Probably not. But by, I think, Apollo 8, they go all the way to the ceiling, circle the moon, and come all the way back down. No problem. Why? Because they said they did. But there's been no platform proposed by NASA, even proposed by NASA, to do this escape of the Earth's gravity. I once did the cubic feet measurement of the service module and the lunar module attached together based on the measurements online, and then the cubic feet of Earth, the displacement of either that creates this pressure vacuum that is gravity, okay? You don't have to believe me, but that's the truth. When you die and your soul goes to heaven, you'll be like, oh my God, the dude was right. Earth is over 3.6 billion times bigger than that payload, which means it's going to tell you what to do. It is not going to listen to your little engine that you see on the little SpaceX thing with the rat, crawls over the engine case live on television. I gotta love that one. A little mouse. So we don't need to have a platform that matches their theory. The name of the game for NASA is Out of Sight, Out of Mind. I'm out of your sight. Now I can tell you a fictional story. It's pretty simple and it's pretty damn brilliant. The people that developed this hoax were nothing shy of brilliant. I would say they had a magician's mind. The misdirection. Now, I rewatched the Bart Sibrel interview, and there's two things that he said that I think were really weird. I think I maybe mentioned this once, but I'm going to go into a little more detail because it's pretty fresh on my mind. Now, I don't disagree with his theory that we could maybe push an object 200 miles into the air with the Saturn V platform. It seems like it makes sense. That's pretty low orbit, and that's only 20% the distance to the beginning of the Van Allen belts. So the radiation up there is not good for you, right? Remember when they said you take a trip from Los Angeles to Denver, Colorado on a commercial flight that's at 30,000 feet, you've basically given yourself a chest x-ray of radiation. That always seemed really high to me, but I've heard this multiple times over 25 years. Maybe one of you guys could chime in. But that's why pilots wear these little pieces of steel that smash two pieces of film together on their lapels, and they have to hand them in, and once they get too much, they're done. The fighter pilots do the same thing. But there was a picture, of Buzz, a movie of Buzz twirling a tuna can. It's a very famous shot. Now, Bart said on my interview, he goes, it's very difficult to simulate zero gravity. I don't know what he's talking about. The vomit rocket's been around for a long time, right? It's a jet that flies up to, I think, about 40,000 feet. And then it basically does a nosedive for 60 seconds, and you can do all kinds of wild stuff. And of course, the videos we see online of people who pay to do this, they're goofing off and running around. But if you built the interior of a capsule, okay, and you wanted to simulate that, then you would be in a very cleansed environment. You're not acting like a clown, and you are twirling a can. So that footage is not hard to make without going to the low orbit heights that he said. The reason why I think they made it into low orbit is because of that fake footage they put out where they're inside the capsule. Neil Armstrong, falsely claims that he has pushed the camera against the window. So what he's trying to say is everything around the Earth, the blackness around the Earth is space without any stars and no Milky Way. We never covered that in the last one. What we find out is it's Michael Collins across the capsule, which is a very tiny, tiny space. They've got red lights in there, which you can use for camera because under certain circumstances, they won't show up in the film. And eventually they pull the camera back and you can see them and they turn the light on. People are moving in front of the Earth. They got a gel in the window to simulate the vanishing point of the sun. All lies, all 100% lies. And then they later said, oh yeah, it was fake, but they were just practicing. Like Bart said, look, if you went, you wouldn't have to fake this. Why would you ever fake it ever? Now they could easily do that from Earth, right? If you have a bunch of high altitude photographs that they stitch together like they did for the messed up blue marble shot, the Red Sea's a big zigzag until 30 years later, and they went, oh my gosh, who released this thing? and they fix it and they don't tell anybody. And again, the kid at NASA who put together the last composite shot of Earth from space, he said, it's a composite, it has to be. It's a composite, it has to be. Oopsie, that means we don't have a satellite in geocentric orbit. Remember, Earth is only 7,900 miles wide, and if you have a geocentric satellite at 30,000 miles away, you could take a shot of Earth, no problem. No problem at all, right? But I talked to Bart about the space station, and his reply almost concerns me. It almost concerns me. Doesn't really concern me a lot, but it was a weird little story he barfed out at the end of the interview that's like, what are you talking about? Was asking him if he thought the space station was real. We know a lot of the footage that they've given us, if not every single slice of footage from the space station, is complete bullshit, right? The China just did a little, video with their astronauts, and a dude had a glass of water on the desk in front of him, right? Whoopsie. But they drop stuff all the time, and you see one woman go, hey, don't grab that thing. We're supposed to be in zero gravity. That's not supposed to hit the ground. And you're showing this. The guy flips over with his David Copperfield wires on that have been around since the 1800s, and the guy reaches over and stabilizes it by grabbing his wire. We have digital wire removal for the last 25 years for movies. So it's not a big deal to fake this stuff. If you think it's a big deal, watch Apollo 13, which I believe is a 1996 movie, and tell me that every shot has anything but realism in it. Ron Howard and team made a movie that you cannot tell whether or not they're really in space or not. That's 96, people. Okay, that's 28 years ago. They can fake it. Trust me. Bart kind of looks at me funny, like he doesn't understand what I'm saying. And then he launches this weird theory. And then he misrepresents the Van Allen belts, which is something that has been misrepresented on Coast to Coast a couple times. And it was one of the things that they put against Joe Rogan to make him crack, besides syndicating and giving him $7 million to shut up. But Bart goes off and says, well, maybe the real space station left Earth to go save planet Earth. He's not even joking, okay? What? This is the guy that will tell you that the Van Allen belts are so deadly that you can't get through them. But what does he say? He says maybe they went out the North Pole where the Van Allen belts don't exist. Oh, really? Really? This is a corny-ass theory that showed up because an artist rendered the Van Allen belts like a torus going through Earth. And of course, a torus is a donut. So the center, when it's going through the top, they accidentally, in drawing a 3D image around Earth or some fake, 3D Earth or whatever, have this absence, not absinthe. That'd make a really cool Van Allen belt. Hole in the center at the top. It's probably, just look at the Northern Lights. It is probably, the South Pole and the North Pole have the most dense Van Allen belts of any spot in the Van Allen belt's existence, right? If you were to take the giant, belty area of a torus and jam it through the center of the top where it's going to condense its path, you have a vortex math going on. And it's not a thin little layer of electrons. This is a gigantic cloud that is funneling in to the center of the Earth and going out the bottom of the Earth and then colliding with the inertia of the ether that's out there and pushing it back around. This is all liquid dynamics, right? It's the same physics as the smoke coming off my stick. It's all the same physics, I keep telling you. There is no hole in the Van Allen belts unless we create a machine that ejects a phenomenal infinity of electromagnetic poles into the sky to literally push it away. And then you probably screw up the Earth. You probably have the core shift or something like that, right? Which I do not believe that for a split second, okay? I know that places used to be cold, and it's because the Earth expands and it's moving the continents around. And so they're in different climates at different times. And it probably happened more recent than we know, where gigantic movements of the Earth happen. And this is where you get the episode I created called The Expanding Earth Event, which is probably the flood that man remembers, that goes into biblical Noah times, right? It always baffles me when I had a guy over here a week ago talk to me about Noah as if it was real. I mean, due respect to fables being believed by grown men, but my gosh, a boat and then one of every other animal, and it just blows my mind that this stuff is floating around still. If you think not believing that negates God, I have pity on your soul. Can't you believe in God without cartoon characters? It's just really weird. All due respect, but it's like, use it to teach kids things, but I guess, I don't know what the fable is. Don't screw around or God will kill the whole planet, but you and your family. It's like, yeah, because God gets really pissed off. He's such an idiot. Anyway, he couldn't comment on my crater statement. I haven't met a human being that I tell that crater story to. Hey, isn't it weird that all the craters on the moon are perfectly round? This is an advanced conspiratorial mind, Bart Sibrel. Why wasn't he able to weigh in on this? Was he tired? I mean, he was just tired. He was looking at me like, I'm done with this interview. It was really strange. I put a good case out there and I just couldn't get anything back from him. But the idea that NASA has run off to enact the Bruce Willis movie called Armageddon is just insane. If you're going to believe in Armageddon, but it's a space station which has no propulsion system on it. It has nothing to really move around the universe on it. It's literally just in its own theory, just a gravity well thing. It's just in orbit, falling around Earth, but it's high enough it doesn't hit the surface. It's not a thing it's not like Space 1999 where they just take the moon and fly off with it, right? Because a little tiny explosion happens on the surface. That show is a great show, but the originating premise is hilarious. But we'll get back to the moon. How about that? There is no hole in the Van Allen belts. Not at the top, not at the bottom. Those are the two most volatile places you do not want to be if you're trying to escape. Imagine trying to create a rocket and you drive right through that and the whole rocket just goes poof into a ball of fire. That's what would probably happen. But we didn't talk about radiation enough in that last episode, so I want to get into it. Radiation has several implications, of course. In the Van Allen belts, you're talking about extreme radiation. In Bart's first film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. He has a great clip from CNN. In 1998, the space shuttle went up to the low 400-mile range, about 430, if I remember this right. The astronauts started vomiting. The astronauts started seeing electrons go through their skull. It was actually giving them tingles of sparkles inside their eyeballs. Their rods and their cones were getting agitated so much. This is only 40% towards the edge of the Van Allen belts. As the story goes, I believe it is they had to drop down to the space station level, which is a little over 200, puke their guts out, and then go home. Now, the whole mission's been scraped from NASA's database. I went up and tried to look for it. But the article did release from CNN that said NASA finds that the Van Allen belts are more deadly than they thought. Oopsie. That negates all the moon missions right there. Done. The other thing, too, is if you're in some wild slingshot theory, let's say you could get that going, you're going to be in the Van Allen belts a lot in the middle of this thing. If you had a platform that could actually create the reverse engineer a slingshot away from Earth, you'd be going through these things all the time. And they're 25,000, 26,000 miles thick. Radiation that would cook anything down to carbon in 2 seconds. It's a 1/4-inch aluminum capsule, people. Remember the guy from NASA told me they're going to have to put 6 inches of water around that capsule just to survive being in ambient space, not a Van Allen belt, and not in the way of a coronal mass ejection. Okay, that's some pretty serious stuff. So they have a problem traveling through the Van Allen belts, we know. Now, because of the first degree information I got from a guy that spent several years on the Mars missions in the 80s, you're going to have 6 inches of water around the capsule just to get to the moon, and probably, obviously, around the service module. I mean, maybe if you're on the other side of the moon for, 1/2 of your orbit, you're going to be okay. They don't have it. All right. Now they land on the moon. Well, they're going to get out of the capsule, right? They're going to get out of this lunar module thing they've got. which again is just built out of junk. You just see the picture and it's just hard to imagine that America looked at this thing and went, well, of course that looks like it'll do the trick. Takes us sometimes 50 years to wake up, but that's okay as long as we do. But those spacesuits don't have any mechanism in them at all to fend off this radiation. And again, if there's a coronal mass ejection during their visit to the moon, which they couldn't possibly predict, what are you going to do? Get in the thing and hop home? You can't get home in the time that burst of energy from the sun is going to take to get to you. It's just going to take a little while to get to you, and you're going to be fried. What else does the radiation cause problems for? Because I almost talked about it and I forgot. Cameras. Cameras. Have you seen the shots that Neil Armstrong took of this trip in 1969? This guy had a Hasselblad camera. I grew up with Hasselblad cameras. My house had 2 at any point in time because my father was a professional photographer. They take a year to make. They're Swiss. They're phenomenal. They have this cluck noise that it's different than all other cameras in the world. I think now since they're digital, they're still trying to hang on to that cluck noise, but they're digitally simulating it like a Tesla makes a whirly noise when it drives off, right? These are phenomenal cameras. The negative is a 120 negative. It's massive. A roll of film has about 28 reliable frames in it. You can sometimes crank out the other 29, 30. I think my father got a 32 one time in his lifetime. I was always a kid, under 10 years old, loading the backs. And so you slip this aluminum piece in, you can pull the back off, put a new back on, pull the aluminum piece out, and he's ready to go. And I'm winding up the film, taking it out, putting a new one in, getting it ready to go. Putting the slip back in. Okay. Very familiar with the camera. How does this work, though? Neil Armstrong's got one basically attached to his chest. How does this Hasselblad work? How does any camera work? Well, usually you got to look through the viewfinder to see what you're taking a picture of. Now, they said they trained him to take good shots. Oh, boy. His shots were time-life covers, okay? Now, I looked up how many shots he took, and I found he didn't take that many shots at all. Some other guy chimed in, 5 or 6 years ago, said, he took 100 shots, took 200 shots, and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of bad photography. NASA dropped an article once, 45 years after the fact, saying, oh, no, here's a bunch of bad photographs he took, because they realized how asinine the theory was. I will challenge anybody to have a Hasselblad camera. We'll keep the top down or we'll block it off. And you go to Disneyland, and you have to attach it to your chest. And I want you to give me one time life cover. You can sit there all day, and I will give you infinite rolls of film. And you'll never be able to take shots as good as Neil Armstrong did. And you can train all you want. You can train all you want. And you'll still, if you get a good shot, you're going to have to take probably 50 shots to get one decent shot. But you won't get this impeccable lighting that they got. Ask Hollywood how much time do they spend lighting a scene before anything happens? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was made, right? A buddy of mine was working across the street from the movie theater in film school. There's a film school right across the street from the cinema that's in there. The Cinerama, which went out of business because of COVID. And so Tarantino was about to shoot a scene across the street. He said the film crew was there about 8 o'clock in the morning. He's in class, but they're all looking out the window. They don't know. You never know what the production is until you get some staff member to walk over and it's Tarantino, and then you know. They lit this thing from 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Tarantino shows up apparently in an SUV, hops out, looks around and says, looks great, action. It went just like that. No setup, no conversations. How you doing? My name's Mr. Tarantino. Nope. He says action, boom, they shot the scene. He got back in his car and went home. Or went back to the studio and shot other things. Okay. How much time is that? That's 7 hours to shoot one scene. It's a well-known fact that Hollywood was hired by NASA to light the Saturn V. That they did, night shots of this thing to make sure it was as sexy as possible. And then, of course, you have probably, maybe, I don't know, Doug Trumbull messing around with some of this stuff, making sure it's perfect. 2001: A Space Odyssey was in development all the way up until 1968 when it released in April. Supposedly in June 68, according to Sibrel's Deathbed Confessions 2, by the way, that it was shot in the month of June. And he pulled back on the Kubrick involvement once he got a deathbed confession of who was on the visitation list and who was allowed in this hangar. Kubrick was not one of them because he was home with his family. Kubrick was never away from his family, ever, okay? While he shot Full Metal Jacket, he was home for dinner every night while shooting Full Metal Jacket. Dinner before it even got dark. He might go back, but he was always home all the time, okay? It wasn't him. Okay, so you have a whole world of radiation going on, right? So you've got tons of radiation going through the capsule. So we know that no one would have survived the Van Allen belts. Everything's just done right at the Van Allen belts. You basically have an overcooked chicken of 3 astronauts before you ever get anywhere. But if you were to pull that camera out on the surface of the moon, the radiation would eat the film up right away. It just would. It would expose the film. What was Madame Curie's method of discovering radiation in bars of uranium? They had film and bars of uranium. She kept it in a drawer. She let the film touch the uranium and they would expose the film, and there was just a big exposed spot right where the uranium bar was, and that's how they figured out it was emitting electrons. That's why the film would get blown away. But there's an interview that has been scrubbed off of YouTube. If it still exists, I cannot find it. I've seen it twice. I never thought that this censorship thing would ever hit. What an idiot I was. But the interview is a documentary where they actually end up interviewing, supposedly, the guy that worked on those cameras. Remember, I told you they take a year to make. So they brought one out that was a duplicate. Now, I don't think it was the one that Neil Armstrong used, of course. They brought one out that was a duplicate, and they're wild looking, man. I mean, they look like the Borg version of the normal Hasselblad you would get at your house. Is all black with, silver trim. This thing's all silver and cool. It's a little more hefty. My father always told me that they developed a special lubricant for it. Well, that's romantic. But they let this guy describe how he built this camera and all this other stuff. And they wait till the very end. They wait till the very end and they say, okay, NASA says that when you're in the sun, in exposed space or on the surface of the moon, it's roughly about 280 degrees Fahrenheit. But when it's in the shadows, it's negative 280 degrees Fahrenheit. I realize these numbers probably are just all made up, okay? So if you want to contest that, I'm with you. But they told the guy this right at the very end of the interview. And they said, what would happen to this camera if it swayed that much in temperature? And a fascinating thing happens because there's a double whammy for this guy. There's a beat in the script. He doesn't know what to say. And he's looking at the guys, and you could see it in his eyes. He's basically thinking, oh my God, we didn't go to the moon, and this is all crap. And he says in the softest little voice, he goes, it would explode. And he's right. The metal would just torque out of, it wouldn't explode like a bomb, but it would definitely torque and twist and be unusable. The precision in one of these shutters in a Hasselblad is like the most complex Swiss watches. I mean, it's phenomenally precise, except that the component of a shutter is far thinner than a cogwheel in some Swiss watch, okay? It's more delicate than you could imagine. When we're taking the backs off, we got to make sure that little slip's in there to protect the shutter. Just saying. All the film wouldn't have worked, video or otherwise, which means they wouldn't have been able to bring anything home. If you have a camera that has a sensor unit, we have these LCD things there in the back of our digital cameras, right? Well, if you have a massive amount of ambient radiation hitting the surface of the sun, let alone the temperature swings, you're basically going to get fully exposed, probably just pure light until it burns out, physically agitating like a solar panel. The electrons are going to overwhelm and it's going to burn up. You might be able to take an old Bakelite radio from the 30s up to the moon and turn it on, at least get some static, because they're made out of like hardened steel, right? The tubes are amazing. Now, one of the listeners just commented today, one of the most brilliant statements I have not contemplated, and that's why I love you guys. This gentleman said, why would they ever bring the moon buggy at all? Why would they bring it? What's the point? I mean, it's a 700-pound vehicle, 699 pounds. They said they couldn't do that unless they re-engineered the engines, which they didn't do. Otherwise, they would have said they'd done it. There had been a delay in R&D. Okay, but he's right. Why would you bring this thing? I mean, what is the difference with the rocks over there versus the rocks over here? We don't know anything about this place, so we don't need empirical data from really far away. And it never went that far away, did it? Even in the theory of it. Funny. Brilliant statement. And you know, all the moon rocks that have been donated around the world turn out to be petrified forest stuff, or, as many of you know, a bunch of NASA's astronauts went down to the South Pole to pick up meteorite debris off of the snow so they could bring it back and say, look, you can do metallurgy experiments on this stuff, and the radioactive frequency from these rocks don't match any of the rocks on Earth, therefore it is from outer space. That I believe could be possible. Another reason why the ISS wouldn't exist for more than a few minutes before we get eaten alive by debris. Yes, the Van Allen belt will fry a lot of that stuff, but the stuff you see in the sky at night, the shooting stars, that stuff would be right there on top of the space station. Remember the big meteorite that went over Russia, which the Russians said actually was a weapon of ours, which I could also believe. That thing was moving Mach 3 or 4. I think it was like up to 15. It was one of the estimates, and it explodes and blows out the windows. I mean, you don't think one of those things would go tearing by a space station, rip it apart? I know there's a lot of space in space, but years and years and decades up there, it's going to be a big Sandra Bullock moment up there. Another big one, which I haven't heard in the comments yet, I'm waiting. Maybe it's in there, I haven't read it yet, is I used to get the mirror thing. Well, NASA put a mirror on the moon and we hit it with lasers today. Funny story about the mirror on the moon. When I took astronomy in college and got 103 without taking any notes whatsoever, it had a NASA guy visit us because our teacher had to go get some surgery or something. So the guy was like running the show for a few weeks. It was awesome when that guy was there. Finally started learning some new stuff. But this guy made it a point to say, I think my physics teacher in high school also said this, that the very first time they bounced a laser off of the moon was in the early 60s. I think the year was 63, but I don't want to quote that just in case I'm wrong and someone else pisses on what I'm saying. But the other thing that will drive it home for you is that there are companies trying to get the rights to broadcast advertisements on the moon today. There have been companies that tried to form this service and they've been shot down because you're not allowed to do that, because it would obviously broadcast to the entire world and it'd be in one language and that kind of stuff. But what are we talking about? We're talking about sending a laser out and getting a signal back. That's all it is. So if you can put a red laser on the moon and see it, then you've got this bounce back. Now, obviously a mirror helps because it's going to be designed to do that. But apparently there's some reflective, well, it's all bright ash up there anyway, right? It is kind of designated to reflect everything back to you. And they say it takes, like up to 2 months to just get this thing aligned to these reflective points. And this is the way it was before the mirror was there. And the mirror supposedly takes a tremendous amount of time to do as well. Now, the other thing is that, one of the loose theories off to the side was that, if you could send an unmanned vehicle to the moon and just crash it and just spills out some mirrors of some sort. I mean, you could make balls out of mirrors or whatever. You could also simulate this without putting astronauts on the moon. But, I'm not a big subscriber of that. Now, the other one was an old picture of a rock. And a lot of the theory was that the rocks were made out of paper mache. And Bart Sabrell, in the interview I did with him, he mentioned that some of the early pictures of the moon were actually soil. And this would be the later missions where they didn't build the hangar with the cement dust. They did say that they'd filmed some, or there's been lots of pretty corroborated rumors that they used Area 51 after that got pretty established in Groom Lake. and that they were using photographic filtering to wash out the dirt to gray, or what he said was blue, and it is a hue of blue. He's right about that. And China, obviously films in their backyard somewhere, and it's just dirt brown the entire time until NASA got a hold of the photos and retouched them, and suddenly they're blue cement color. I'm glad I took down those images when I did. I think they're still searchable up there. But, hey guys, figure out what color the moon is, because our eyes don't deceive us when we look straight up at it, okay? Now, the other big one is the lack of stars. ISS doesn't have any stars. It's the most asinine thing you've ever heard in your life. Now, in the 60s, you might be able to get away with this theory for a little while. The idea, of course, is that the aperture of the camera is dialed down to account for the super reflective surface of the moon, and therefore it's cutting out pinhole stars in the sky. And of course, the real reason why they can't have stars is two reasons. One, they've got to hide the wires that are attached to the astronauts, who are the actors in the suits. But two, because they're in a warehouse or a geodesic dome in future productions with maybe front projection that was perfected during 2001, they don't have the scientific ability from 69 to 72 to push stars onto the surface of this container they're in that would be accurate, right? Now, in the 21st century, there's no excuse in the world why you would not see stars in space, especially during all the ISS stuff, okay? Reason being is that, one, the cameras no longer have these problems. Remember when you first got a cell phone with the camera in it? If you pointed it at the sun, you would blow out your camera. That was literally in the warranty of the camera. Don't do it. We all did it accidentally, but then you'd have like a little hot spot in the future shots for a few minutes as this thing was trying to reset itself, okay? Not a problem anymore, is it? The Milky Way is the thing that nobody talks about. Okay. Yes, when you're in a light pollution area like a big city, you don't see the Milky Way. But when you go out to rural America or rural country, wherever you live, the Milky Way is this immutable band of stars. It's some wild thing up there. It's like the inside of an egg or something. I don't know. It's like the weak shell or something. But it is this amazing band of stars. Imagine being on the moon, even in the 60s or the early 70s. You would at least have the astronauts say, whether they could film it or not, they would say, oh my God, the Milky Way looks more amazing than we've ever seen this ever. There's no atmosphere. So light pollution is atmosphere, right? City lights and house lights are bouncing off of the atmosphere. Well, there's no atmosphere. You are going to see the most crystal clear stars you've ever seen in your life. My physics astronomy teacher in high school said, look, if you go out and you acclimate your eyes in rural Kansas, okay, you could instantaneously see 1,200 stars. And then if you let your eyes acclimate, you could probably get another 1,000 stars. And my astronomy teacher, physics teacher, sound waves teacher, programming teacher, all the one guy, he drilled his own map of all the stars and built an observatory in our high school. So he built a star projector by hand, okay? He said he broke hundreds of needles or little drill bits, and he did it all at the proper, width. When he turned this thing on the first time, oh my God, I was like in a professional observatory. It was absolutely phenomenal. What I still don't understand is why he didn't do annual or like routine shows. He could have rented that space and said, hey, every Friday night we do an astronomy show with education in it. I mean, I saw this thing like 2 or 3 times. It was a whole room in the high school. The kids helped build the dome, and he built everything else. So this guy knows what he's talking about. You would never, ever, ever be able to take a photograph with modern cameras without seeing the stars. And if nothing else, you would have a camera up on the space station, which, by the way, doesn't have a window that looks towards space. It's got this like it almost looks like an octagon, but it's not. It's like a 10 window segment that points towards Earth. So you're in an international space station that's just observing Earth. You don't have a dual window. Remember Luke Skywalker in the Millennium Falcon, when he went on the gun station, right? And he has the turret up and down. He can look down, he can look up, because he needs to be able to shoot everything that's out there. Well, they never thought that through, That little capsule that's on the side of the Millennium Falcon where they fly from. You need one that goes down towards Earth and one that goes up towards space. It's a space station. So you should be able to take a camera, point it at the stars, and go, see, you can't see it yet, right? Because I got it all adjusted for, something bright that's going on. And now watch this. Ting, 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 ting. Open up the aperture, and all of a sudden all the stars show up. When they did the CG images for especially for the Orion project, if you pay attention, they rendered stars in the background as this Orion CG vehicle is zooming by the camera. Why do that? You can't see them, right? Now, there has been some bizarre theories that you can't see stars unless you have an atmosphere to see them. Okay, well, what is atmosphere? Oxygen. Okay, I don't believe this personally, but guess what also has an atmosphere? Your eyeballs have atmosphere. They do. It's liquid atmosphere. Well, I can see everything right now, and I don't have oxygen in my eyeballs, right? I have liquid in my eyeballs. So I'm taking this mechanism with me to be able to see anything that I need to see. Be it on the moon, be it on Earth. I'm going to see what's out there. I will. Now, when they came back from the Apollo 11 mission and they're sitting around that table, all depressed, right? Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins, a British guy got up and said, "Could you see stars when you were out there?" And, they think they're going to get caught in the next few hours, right? So they are super depressed, and it's bizarre, right? They just did the most amazing thing that man has ever done in the history of man, right? Pyramids are pretty cool, but going to the moon beats the pyramids. Believe it or not. They didn't go. That's why we still need to go, right? If you can. Michael Collins says, he looks at his buddies, and you can tell he's realizing his buddies don't want to lie. They don't know what to say. And Buzz ain't saying shit, man. Buzz is like drawing pictures on the tabletop. They eventually chuckled a little bit as they unwound, but nothing like, hey, I just survived the most mind-blowing experience of mankind. Michael Collins looks over and looks at the guy. He goes, I don't believe we saw any stars when we were up there. An obvious lie, if you've ever seen this squirmy bastard lie, just bloom. And then apparently when he wrote a book about it later in his life, he claimed that he saw the most amazing stars he's ever seen in his life. Isn't it weird you can't remember something right after you do it, but later on you just get all this data back? Isn't that interesting, especially when you're profiting off of a lie? The other one is the gravity on the moon. The idea that there's 1/6 gravity on the moon. Okay. Well, 1/6 gravity apparently is 1/2 of an overcranked camera from Hollywood. Cameras at that time, when you went to the movie theater, were 24 frames per second. Now, if you take any of the astronaut footage with them jumping around all over the place and you just put it in the VLC player, where you actually get to specify 2x. Windows has got a bunch of them, but the VLC player is the easiest way to do it. There's a playback menu. You got a little sliding bar in the menu. You just go 2x. Suddenly all the astronauts and the debris off their feet goes into real time. It's perfect. So 1/6 gravity is now just 2x on a camera. It's called overcranking the camera. You film it 48 frames per second, and then you play it back at 24 frames a second, and it's half speed. So you need 2x to bring it back up. Now, when I took the rover shots that I put in the last episode, when you put it into VLC and you crank it to 2.5 in VLC, it starts to look very real time. However, when I put it in Final Cut and I told it 250%, which should be 2.5x, it was a little bit faster than VLC. So if you want to see that stuff, download the video off YouTube, put in the VLC player, which is free, either Mac or Windows, and just hit 2.5 and watch it, and your mind will blow how real-time that looks as the dummy's sitting there inside the vehicle, right? Let's talk about that for a second. So there's a dummy in the vehicle. I mentioned this last episode. one, he's not touching any of the controls. So this thing is going, stopping, turning, and no one's touching anything, right? Why is it a dummy? Well, probably because the vehicle can't handle a 200-pound dude on there, a 180-pound guy with the suit and all the junk on him, right? That's my assumption. What they should have done is say, okay, we're going to run the dummy around far away, but then we're going to run at least a 10-foot, 20-foot segment where the dude is inside. I don't give a shit if we got to push him, pull him with the cable, however we do this, and he's going to actually gesture to the camera, hey, what's up, good job, this is fun, hey, mom, look at me. The other huge thing I didn't mention, which is one of the ultimate smoking guns of all time, is they never pointed a video camera in all 6 missions. They failed to point a video camera at Earth. Picture camera, sure, there's something called Earth Rising. It's this photograph of the Earth, and when it was first published, there was a mat around Earth when they scanned the books and then took a Hicon of it in Photoshop. You could tell it was inserted, right? The word on the street is that they use counterfeiters of money who are razor blade experts on negatives to clean up all this bad footage. They have these bad photographs and to composite stuff on top of stuff, which is why a lot of the crosshairs that are built into the Hasselblad camera, okay, it doesn't matter about exposing outside, they're always going to be on film because they're inside the camera. They're not all there. Some of the antennas were disappearing too because they couldn't razor blade this thing out. They screwed up. But there's no video footage of Earth. And how could you possibly not take that shot? What was NASA's official word on this? It's the most asinine thing you've ever heard in your life. Oh, it's so bright it would have blown out the camera. Oh, but filming the surface of the moon, which is almost pure white, is perfectly fine. The Earth's not even pure white. You couldn't stop an astronaut from shooting the Earth. You couldn't. If you told the guy not to, he'd still go, hey, look at that. See, there's the Earth. It's right there. That's us. That's us back there. It would be one of the most pinnacle shots you'd ever want on camera, where the astronauts are going, like you do where you hold the moon with your fingers, right? There'd be that little meme. He'd be holding Earth like this or something, right? Who knows? Never happened. Never, ever happened. I'm sure NASA will dig something out, right? But I was talking about wires on these astronauts. Now, some of them, okay, so what we're talking about here is that there's no stars on the set because to keep the top half black means if you have a wire up there and you were trying to shoot stars up there, right? You put a bunch of like Star Trek props up there to put stars up there. If the wire kept going in front of a star, you would see a systematic cancellation of the star. So they don't want any of that stuff. That's why it's just black up there. But you might be thinking, man, I've seen a lot of the footage of these astronauts running around. Never saw any wires. How's that possible? Now, there is a little 6-inch antenna over the left shoulder, at least of one of the designs of the suits. And the famous shot of Buzz Aldrin, which Sibrel has an issue with, where Buzz has got his arm tucked and folded. Sibrel was saying, how could it be wrinkly on the suit if it's inflated? And the answer is, it's a bladder underneath the material that is folded, right? So, of course, the outer part of it could be wrinkled and the inside of it's smooth as glass. There's no problem with that theory. He might be right, but there's no problem with that theory. And you wouldn't inflate so badly that the astronaut couldn't move their arms, right? You don't want some like C-3PO problem or some John McCain arms, right? But I took a piece of footage off of a British documentary that somebody made over there, probably in the 90s, where it was interesting. This documentary had 2 parts to it. And this dude was claiming, he was like, look, I know exactly. He claimed that he was actually part of the crew that faked the footage, especially of the lunar module top coming back to the surface module, where you have kind of like some black, pieces that are being blocked from the outside. It's almost like a shutter opened up, and here it's coming up to go to the portal thing. What he said is they created a canvas that was the shape of what you were able to see, and they front projected the footage, this stop animation stuff with this moon prop, which I didn't talk about, coming up, and it basically was black where there wasn't a canvas. It was brilliant. He said he was the one that engineered this. But on one of these moments, there's a famous shot where an astronaut he puts a pole in the ground and falls down. And he's stuck. And this is done several times. So they always get kind of stuck. But he keeps trying to like push himself off the ground. And there's a famous one where a guy actually gets himself back up. But there's a famous one where the guy can't get back up. And his buddy's like hopping over to him saying, "I'll help you out, dude. Just chill out. I'll help you out." Now, right when that guy reaches down to help his buddy, suddenly his friend just, without pushing, he's off rhythm, he just pops back up and steps on his feet because somebody pulled a wire and pushed him back up on his feet. In that sequence, I high-conned every single frame of this thing, and I've got this famous frame. You're going to think I edited it, but I didn't edit it at all, other than to just basically say, make the whites really white, and anything that's remotely not white, dark. And right there, boom, perpendicular to the ground, there's an extra wire going straight up from this astronaut off camera. It's not his antenna, because the antenna is parallel with the dude's back, right, at all times. Like if I have one on my shoulder here, some Boba Fett thing, it's going to be attached to me. It'll always be parallel with my body, right? Nope, this wire goes straight up because it's part of the harness system that they're using to make sure these astronauts don't fall over and they can't get back up. It's a very real thing. So let's talk about moon props. It's unbelievable they publish these moon props. So NASA created 2 gigantic props. And they put movie camera rails around them to create simulated shots of the surface of the moon. And artists looking at photographs of the moon from telescopes were simulating and doing a brilliant job, but they had to simulate what they thought was the contour of what they were looking at in the photograph, because we didn't have technology to LiDAR the moon, right? The sphere was completely covered with the surface of the moon, and one of them was a big wall, okay, that was just a slice of a sphere. And both units have basically a train track. It's a rail that you put a camera on and drag the camera across and film the surface of this fake moon and then publish it as if it's real. Now they publish it thinking you're an idiot because they tell you it's just a prop. Why on earth would you create that? Why would you ever create it? It has no technical sense other than wasting taxpayers' money to ever create this prop. Even if they said it was part of a movie, which they didn't, we'd have to see the film, and I've never seen anything ever to use those props except for NASA. So they built props, they created fake footage of the surface of the moon, and then showed you the props. I've got a picture of the prop prior to it surfacing, and then one with a guy painting it, and I think one with it finished, and it's all lit beautifully. I mean, they did a brilliant job. Hats off to these dudes who were faking it, right? Now, another thing I worked on probably 8 years ago was it finally dawned on me, okay, that there's this engine that's attached to the lunar module base, right? And they said it's a 10,000-pound thrust engine. The way that this will occur to you is when you look at the footage. I'll put the frame up there. When the top takes off with the bolts, and by the way, I forgot to play the rest of that footage. Remember the people that believe that a human being panned the camera up and it's all a set? Well, they're correct. The other half of that footage, which I have, is them all of a sudden after the thing takes off and, gets out of camera, the camera comes back down and some dude's just like panning all over the ground looking at the surface of the moon. It's just astronomically ridiculous that you don't think it's a human being. And again, the delay between Earth and the moon in terms of broadcasting a signal with analog technology, Sibrel has done a lot of math on this, and he says, look, at the time, he said in the 90s, we still had a 4-second delay between New York and Baghdad. And he goes, analog technology back then would have put it at least at 9 seconds. He thinks it's probably closer to 15 seconds. And therefore, you couldn't do anything as a response to anything happening on the moon because you wouldn't get the data for 15 seconds, and it would take you 15 seconds to push it back up there. But this next thing is very interesting. I looked up a ton of rocket engine designs from the 60s. Now, when you look at the schematic of the inside of the bottom of the lunar module, there's all these tanks in there, right? Okay, well, you'd have to have a tank for the fuel. You'd have to have a tank for oxygen to keep the cabin nice and oxygenated. Where's there room for an engine? I mean, you got a cone sticking out the bottom with all this other, tent material and weird, like scrambled up flat black metal with all the foil to make it look space age, right? All the proppy stuff. But where's the engine? 10,000 pound thrust engine. Is that like a little engine, or is that a big engine? Is that a medium engine? Well, it's kind of towards the small side. But if you ever look at the mechanics to metabolize the fuel, and if you ever watch documentaries on the Rocketdyne designs of the Russian rockets that were found to be 2.5 times faster or 2.5 times more powerful than our 1995 engines, but they shelved theirs in 1972 and said they didn't have enough thrust to get to the moon with a rocket that had way more boosters on it than our Saturn V. It's very precise, man. It's extremely precise. It's so precise that when you engineer a tube that's taking in fuel and you route it around the engine, one, you got to route some of the fuel around the cone because the cone gets so hot it can melt. But you got to route that stuff, and it's literally the turn radius of one of those pipes can make, if you don't get it right, makes the whole engine explode. That's how fragile the design is of this stuff. So to suddenly say they had a way to compact this thing in 2 feet, it's just astronomically ridiculous. I mean, all engines had a giant mechanism above the cone. And so I don't believe, for a second, that they could actually create the 10,000 pound thrust engine with the cubic space they had, nor can you put that much heat next to all these tanks, right? A tank of oxygen, a tank of fuel, and you've got a really blazing hot engine right next to it. Seems a little risky, right? I think the engine would be way up into the cabin area. The problem is they can't have that because it's got to detach and go up, supposedly, right? And if you look at the bottom of that unit, it's pretty smooth when it goes up. I mean, it doesn't look like there's any connection points between the top and the bottom. There has to be something because there's a control, theoretically, for whoever's the pilot of the lunar module to hit that engine, right? Now, the other thing, too, is that as the lunar module's falling, and there were arcade games as early as the late 70s where you're navigating a lunar module into a cavity and you have to land it. This thing has got a forward momentum. It does. I mean, in real life, it would drop off, and it's going as fast as the service module, which the lowest number I've ever heard a listener come back to me and say was 3,500 miles an hour. Okay. When a jet goes 3,500 miles an hour, what do we call that? Isn't that like Mach 3? SR-71 level of speed? Now, there's no atmosphere up there, so you don't have any of those problems. But how are you going to slow that thing down in a vacuum with fire? How are you going to do that? What are you pushing off of? You're pushing off of nothing, okay? So until you have a plume of fire that's coming out of that engine and that fire is licking the surface of the moon, do you get anything that might, what's it supposed to do? Reverberate back up into the vehicle? Equal and opposite reaction? I don't think so. So there's no way you can bring this thing down and touch the surface of the moon. You would just be a tumbling rock for miles and miles and miles. It would be a splatter of human being and dust and tent poles, right? Now, the shadows on the surface of the moon are pretty conclusive. NASA's big rebuttal to this was that they said that the surface of the moon is curved, with all kinds of different terrain, and it has craters in it, and so you're getting these perpendicular shadows because of that curvature. What's funny about that is we got the same curvature on planet Earth, and we never see what they're talking about. We just don't. But the shadows are most prevalent with pretty level Earth, right? There might be a crater in front, but that's not the shadows we're worried about. We're worried about the shadow off of the astronaut taking the photograph and a rock that's on the ridge of a dent that's also shoving it straight left, because they estimate there's up to 5 lights on most of the shots. And I forgot to complete what I was talking about the rocks. there's the sea rock. And NASA was caught with basically what looks like paper mache rocks, okay? And that would make sense. You do paper mache, whatever. They're light, you can move them around. But they don't really care probably if they're real rocks either. So the paper mache thing's kind of like, maybe. Seems a little strange. There seems to be a fold in the rock, but when you really look at the fold, it's a shadow. But what they said is it was a hair that got into the camera when they finally developed this footage. Okay, little Clarence Thomas hair on that thing. All right. But somebody mentioned the fact that if you expose, and I was, again, a photo studio child, what happens if you block light from being exposed on a piece of film? Is it dark or is it light? Well, what is the exposure doing? The paper's already white. You're exposing light onto the paper to create an impression of whatever mixture of chemical you're using, either CMYK or just black and white. If there was a hair in the projection system of exposing the negative, then it would be white and not dark. The photo was then re-released without the C on the rock. Now, the idea that they would take a rock and put a big C on it and go, okay, C rock here, A rock there, probably not, because you're talking about hundreds of rocks, which again, they don't care if they're rocks. What do they care? I don't really think they made paper mache rocks. So whatever the C was, it could have been some double exposure thing where someone's taking a photograph of a photograph and there's a hair in the thing. Maybe it was a slide and there's some little hair in there. I don't think you should jump off too deep on the sea rock. Now, something else I heard much later in life was the participation of Area 51 in this. Now, it's weird. Me and Area 51 have a weird story. I met a woman who grew up in Groom Lake. She was an adopted child into the family that owned Groom Lake, and she corroborated all the way back to the early 50s the nasty stuff that went on at their ranch house that was on the property. They own the whole thing. So Area 51 they own that land too, and it just kept getting eminent domain and stolen from them because they wanted to build. Well, first they were testing tons of nuclear bombs. I didn't know that till real late in my life. But eventually built Area 51 after a while, and I don't even know what year that was built. But she said that she woke up as a child. This had been the mid-50s. She woke up as a child with frogmen in the house, poking them in the chest. Little kids, okay? Plus the adults are getting the same treatment. They're getting poked in the chest by M16s saying, you need to get the F out of here and blah, blah, blah. And they knew it's the government. And this is in a time when, G-man, don't do that, right? America was under this delusion that the Skull and Bones hadn't taken over the country and was poking everybody in the chest with the old Pinkerton crowd, right? So we broke a story on my old show, MK Ultra Radio, 2 weeks before the press had it, that the government was stealing Groom Lake from them and giving them this ridiculous, like $5 million settlement on what was easily a $30 million piece of land. Plus, the commandos went in and blew up the copper mine that they were making money off of to kill that off way before this eminent domain. So they destroyed the form of income that they had and then stole the land from them for $5 million. And Obama's administration gagged them from saying anything about it to the press until it was announced, until they could control the spin. Very interesting. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is that when they blew up stuff and tested bombs and all kinds of stuff, they realized they were kind of creating sort of a moon surface. I mean, it was indicative of big giant craters everywhere. And supposedly, okay, some of the emissions that you really had the big vistas in the shots were actually shot at Groom Lake because they already locked up the sky. You can't fly over it. And, the night that you're going to film, you just put a bunch of birds up there, and man, anybody coming near that airspace, you're going to get in big trouble. And so the idea was, I don't know if they took the cement powder and spread it everywhere, but they had built these sets up there and filmed them, which expanded what they were seeing. Now, I've heard every theory on planet Earth that I know of about where they could have possibly filmed this. Some people theorized they had built an underground base, which we know there's tons of underground bases, but they built gigantic rooms like movie studio soundstage, which I don't know if you've ever been to a soundstage. I mention this every once in a while. When you go into a Hollywood soundstage, it's breathtaking. The ceilings are 60 to 100 feet tall. I mean, it is just unbelievably how big that. I might have exaggerated, but I mean, it's at least 60 feet tall. It just keeps going up and up and up. You can see someone building a city in there and still have enough room to build the stars. I mean, it's humongous. And my last time I went into a soundstage was in Sony MGM. I went into the soundstage where they actually filmed at least a portion of Wizard of Oz, and they took me into the sound booth where Dorothy sang Under the Rainbow, right? Sad part was they said we're tearing this all down. So it was a real sad thing, but it wasn't the way it was back in the day. Now, I also mentioned the kid from Caltech. The other little footnote to him was he identified himself as a graduate student. So he'd already graduated Caltech, and he was in his master's degree when he called up the official at NASA. And there's been a series of calls to NASA which are very revealing. One of them was the Hubble telescope launch, which I believe was supposed to be 93, and it was fixed in 97. The theory behind this thing is it's an old spy satellite that was normally pointed at Earth, and someone got the bright idea to go ahead and point it the other way and try to capture real deep space shots, right? Which could be used for all kinds of reasons, right? But this kid called up NASA because there is a database, and I forgot what it's called, but it's a database of everything that's ever been launched into orbit. It's a brilliant idea. You need to save a record of everything you put in space, and generally how high you put it and where it's going to be, its orbital instincts and that kind of stuff. Meaning, is it going to sink down in a number of years? You got to watch for it as it gets closer to Earth. Is it supposed to crash into Earth? All that kind of stuff, right? This dude calls up and he says, look, I can't find any record of the satellite Hubble, which got launched through the space shuttle, ever happening. But you guys said you guys launched it, and it was above board technology. It wasn't that they were going to show us all of its mechanics, but, it's got this wild mirror in it and all this other stuff. There were talks of it being repaired at one point in some of the missions, but never it being launched. It's a very interesting thing. You remember when we got the shot of Saturn with the hexagonal top on the top? Well, one, that would never occur ever, ever, ever. Okay. And we're going to be a little bit off the moon thing, but I want to just illustrate a little bit of the genealogy of how these shots happen of these bodies in our solar system. There was a little movie that came out in 1984 by Peter Hyams. It was the horrible sequel, horrible in certain ways, of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So there was a DVD. A buddy of mine did some of the credits for that. And so he gave me a laser disc, which I sent off to my father to be mastered down to a digital format so I could put it on the web. And I was just looking through this, and it's just a bunch of 2010 making of stuff. And at the very end, it's an interview between two guys and an interviewer, I should say, two guys and some of them asking questions at JPL. If you've seen the movie, it has a big thing about Jupiter, because that's where the ship I arrive in at the intro, that's where the ship was going. The ship's called the Discovery. Now in the movie, Jupiter is computer rendered. So what did they figure out? This movie released in 1984, okay? About the time that the Voyagers are sent out there and they're getting far enough out there, they're supposed to be bringing back some photographs of stuff. Okay. Well, one thing is interesting is that Jupiter is close enough that our telescopes can get pretty good shots of it. Well, this guy's sitting there. He's got about a 30-inch television behind him. And it's more than just Jupiter being a sphere. It's something else is happening to it, but it's easier just to do the sphere. But they had figured out how to project onto it, the clouds that go around it, right? So I don't think anything of this because I didn't know this as a kid, but I definitely saw the movie, and my bud Sid worked on it. Did a bunch of the ship stuff, which was the best part of the film. And in 1985, when I was working at Walmart as a stock kid, when Sam Walton was still alive, walking around our store every once in a while, They had some National Geographic in the break room, and it started having those really awesome Voyager shots of our planets, right? Okay. We know that at that point, when I finally saw this making up, I thought, oh my God, JPL is the company that develops this faux technology for NASA to charge its monthly fee to, right? Its monthly fee to us, right? They had basically developed in Hollywood a technology that NASA then uses, or maybe it's the vice versa, so they could create these images of these planets, which are always like shitty images, to be honest, right? I mean, they're not like, now they're coming in and they're just unbelievable. And Jupiter finally looks nothing like it's ever looked when you look through a telescope. And people just eat it up and repost it online. It's crazy. But when Saturn shows up with this, I don't know if it's hexagonal or octagonal, it's got a shape in the clouds at the top that no organic gas giant would ever be able to create and maintain. Maybe for a split microsecond over the course of 1 billion years, it might make that shape for a split second, but it's not going to sit there. And of course, they're blowing smoke up your butt. It's Van Allen belts, trapping the gas in a particular geometric shape. Makes no sense at all, right? Like I said, if an ethereal particle was a square, then planets would be square. But it's not. But I'm old enough to know I use paint applications on computers from probably 83 up, at least 84 and up, okay? And one of the crappiest parts about paint applications all the way up until the mid-90s, when you took a circle tool and you drew a circle, the algorithms didn't have anti-aliasing, and so it was trying to guess, especially when it got small, it was trying to guess how to make this thing look like one, and it's trying to calculate these dots and pi, right? Oddly enough, they would make straight edge shapes when you got too small. It looks to me like whoever wrote the algorithm they made the spherical algorithm for the center of the Saturn pretty good, but when it tapered off, the same algorithm has to be adjusted as it goes to the top, and they didn't. And so it started creating this shape at the top. Then they publish it, and it's amazing how they don't have a group of people to audit the material they put out there. No one's in a rush to see an image of Saturn. You don't need to rush it out the door. Make sure it's right, then put it out there, right? But there was an image of Jupiter that had this little like halo around the top. It was like the northern lights of Jupiter, right? It looked like someone had lit a crown across the top of fire. It almost looked like those slow motion shots when water hits water and it makes that crown when it pops up. Well, a couple problems with this shot of Jupiter. I'll see if I can't find it. One, the base shot of Jupiter, you know how we can reverse look up images, right? We know that there's factions out there that have been censoring our ability to reverse look up images because there's a little war over there near Europe and Russia where they've been lying like crazy about the photographs and saying this building was hit by Russia, and then we look at it and it's a fire that happened 10 years earlier. And so they're honest, right? But before that started to take place, because of that event over there, we reverse looked up the picture of Jupiter and found out it was like 3 or 4 years old. It's not going to have the same cloud configuration from 4 years ago or whatever amount of time it was. But they made a mistake. An observatory in Germany published that image of Jupiter with a little ring on top. The Hubble telescope publishes the picture, claiming that same image, and then something called the Sophia telescope, which is inside of a big jumbo jet, and apparently this thing is sideways, and you can open up the door and you just shoot these shots out towards space, and you're above a lot of the atmosphere because apparently this thing goes really high. I have family members that are very close to that project, okay? They know the staff that runs the whole project, okay? It's a real thing. So one image gets published by 3 different sources all at the same time. Everybody wants to claim it. So who took the shot? Lies, lies, lies. Okay? I want to remind you why this whole mission probably took place, right? We know that it had a significant financial impact on Russia. My suspicion is that was something they had discovered over time in the mid-'60s and said, wow, this is having a real detrimental effect on a country that is really struggling to appear to be a superpower at the time. Now, I think Russia's fine today, but back in those days, limited funds, the whole place is crumbling under the communist rule of the USSR. I think, unequivocally, the reason why this whole thing was greenlit by Kennedy, and not that he had any knowledge about this, was that they wanted to take all of these Nazis they had got, especially von Braun, who had done the V-1 Buzz rocket, which is more like a plane with this little throbbing engine in it, and the V-2 rocket, which is one of the first of its kind, which was just wreaking havoc on England, right? They sent hundreds of those things over there. And the V1s would just randomly just land and kill people, and the V2 were not that much better. And they were trying to get it to London to really freak people out. And my friends in England said, look, man, in our neighborhoods, there's a bunch of houses that are attached, which is a low-class thing, supposedly. Not that way anymore. It was like, do you live in a detached house? That meant you were upper class. It's kind of funny. They have really cool places now, but they'll be missing homes. And that's where a rocket landed and blew it up. And out of just respect, they just leave it empty. Probably not the case today. I mean, everyone's developing land, right? But there definitely are examples of that. So they smuggle these Nazis over through Operation Paperclip, right? It's said to be about 2,200 folks. The Dulles brothers did the smuggling. Dulles Airport, where is that located? Suspicious. But they took the majority and actually went off and did mine stuff, MK Ultra stuff. But a good sub 1,000 went in and were cleansed and given new last names, and they were just a part of society. But Werner von Braun, the guy that was the genius, okay, he starts not necessarily heading up NASA, but he becomes a big part of it, right? Obviously, he's the guy that is responsible for the Saturn V rocket, which is odd because in the 50s, he said that, like Bart Sibrel said several times, that you would have to build a space station, a wheel in space. He did this special on Walt Disney's show. And he said you have to ferry fuel up to the space station. Then you could build a vehicle to basically not have all the propellant problems of getting off the surface of the Earth. And now you can shoot off from the space station and get to the moon. Isn't that interesting? That's 2001's whole premise, right? Well, they obviously had developed a nuclear bomb, which I got an episode. Did atomic bombs exist, or do they exist? If you want to debate that, I'm right there with you. Go see the episode, okay? But I got some pretty close buddies that say, oh yeah, they exist, okay? But they went from big, giant, fat things down to like golf ball size payloads, and then they could guide them. And so you have that War Games kind of warhead where it comes over your city and splits off into a bunch of little guys, right? They wanted to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. Now, technically speaking, the first ones on paper are in the 50s. But, you know, the length of the rockets, how far they could go, the efficiency of them, all this other stuff, because, you know, if you want to pack onto a weapon as much payload as you possibly can, that's the efficiency algorithm they're going for. And then you want to send it as far as you possibly can. In our case, it would be probably no more than 8,000 miles away, and you could hit the other side of the world. So they want to fund this in a way that the American public will accept it, and it's probably better not to even tell them. So the whole time they're developing all these rockets to go to the moon, they're actually developing sister projects, which are basically not men, it's warheads. Hell, even if it's conventional, it'll be phenomenal, right? Well, I just saw another documentary on the first Trident submarines that had nuclear weapons on them. And during this whole process, you end up getting that famous launch sequence where the rocket comes out of the water, blows off its casing, and then takes off and starts hauling butt. The first ones weren't really, they say they were intercontinental, but I don't think they really had that much range in them. But today it's not a joke, okay? These ships exist. I had a buddy of mine from high school that had to babysit the missile silos in Wichita, Kansas. And I interviewed him once because he talked about that. He did like a couple of years, and he said, look, nobody does more than a couple of years unless they're just a really rock hard human being. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, the stress in these silos is ridiculous. And I said, really? I said, we're in peacetime. I mean, like, he goes, not us. He goes, we're not in peacetime. He goes, there are pilots all over the world that are ready to jump in planes. You realize you've got guys in the high altitude space suits ready 24 hours a day. I mean, they go to work and they get in these suits and they never take off. They're just ready to take off. I mean, imagine that, man. It'd be like going to a movie set to put on 4 hours of makeup, sit and wait, and just simply have it taken off every single day, but you never get a shot. I mean, that's the kind of effort. But he said that they sit in these missile silos staring right at the missile, and he goes, these things are, just the pressure on us, everybody's sweating bullets constantly. And he, without me asking, he told me that the launch sequence, because he was trying to explain to me why it's so stressful, and he said that once we turn our keys and this thing is armed and going to take off, he goes, we got to get out of that building and run. Now, this would have been late 80s, early 90s, so I'm sure they're not that bad today. But I guess I don't understand it. I personally don't get it. I don't know why they wouldn't have a bunker at every level that these dudes are at, and then you just run deep into a bunker at whatever depth you're at, and then you got a staircase that goes out. Maybe they're just cheap asses, right? But I think that the moon missions were literally a method of doing a black project on the side for the ICBMs because they were ready to go the second the 72 mission was done. The other thing I want to mention, and I think Bart Sibrel has calmed down a little bit, is the blame game, especially towards the astronauts. Let's just say you're an astronaut and you're on this list, meaning you were formerly sort of a Top Gun pilot, a top test pilot. You're just really talented. And they're picking on you because they're like, look, you're the one that's believable, right? We're not sending Joe the plumber to the moon. It's got to be someone with instincts about flying, even though nothing you're going to touch has anything related to aviation on Earth. Okay, it just doesn't, right? So there's this pivotal moment, okay, where Sibrel had mentioned in my interview that he had spent at least 8 hours with the wife and the son over the course of several visits. And he told me that he had a stack of paperwork about the actual death of those guys, being cyanide being found in their bodies, that kind of stuff, which you don't ever hear. He also, I interviewed him about the situation of Gus Grissom saying this thing was a lemon. And apparently that was a statement he had made to the press without video cameras, and people had reported back to the family that this had actually occurred. So he had told them, look, this isn't going to make it. Plus there's the guy, Bill Casing, who worked as a memo editor at NASA's very top level between these guys talking to each other. And he said when he was on Oprah in the early 80s, that the memo had come across by the mid-60s saying that this thing has a 1 in 10,000 chance of ever getting to the moon, which is not a literal statement of odds. It is to say, in one certain almost humorous way, this ain't going to make it. Sorry. And Gus knew. So they killed Gus and 2 other astronauts. Now they've got all kinds of things solved. They've killed off the guy that's trying to tell the truth. And now they have a weapon against everyone else who's on the mission list. Okay, so you're Neil Armstrong, you're Buzz Aldrin, you're Michael Collins. Even though we're not happy with, say, Buzz's performance, punching Sibrel in the face, and Michael Collins writing a book that contradicts his statements in public right after he accomplished the event, we can't blame these people. They're threatened. They're threatened at the ultimate level. They still have to have pensions that are paying their bills while they run off and live their life, right? Do what you're told, and you get to live this wonderful life. And I'm going to give you a weird analogy, okay, to show you, hopefully, what you would do in the same situation. Imagine you're in the 60s and you're a full-grown adult. Let's say you even have some money. Maybe you're even famous, got a little bit of influence. And you learn that they're going to assassinate either JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, or RFK, or Dorothy Kilgallen in November 8th, 1965. Someone tells you that's going to take place before it happens. Knowing what you know now about those organizations that do those kind of things, would you pick up a phone and try to stop those events from occurring? Do you think you could? Do you think someone would intercept your call and then come after you and wipe you off the face of the planet and then do what they're going to do anyway? The only thing you would do would be getting 2 people killed. What do you think would have happened to any one of the astronauts that said they were going to blow the whistle? They'd have to be very careful how they did it, right? They would have had to have done it at the press conference right after the mission. The first team would have to be the one to do it. And then what are they going to do? The other guys have to jump in on it as well. They would have to have been literally in low orbit writing little letters to each other. I'm going to tell as soon as we get back, are you in? And at that point, they're running a risk, right? Buzz is like, no way, dude, I'm not doing that. Then you're screwed. They put you in a situation where getting out of that situation will be extremely difficult. Now, it's said that Neil Armstrong didn't do any interviews the entire time since the mission. I found at least one interview. I think he did some little light interviews, but nothing super serious, nothing like a documentary, whatever, where other guys are like, hey, is there another camera in the room? I'm ready to talk some more, you know? I think that if Sibrel had approached Buzz a little bit differently at that bookstore where he cornered him with the footage, he may have gotten a confession out of him, being a little more gentle and saying, hey, buddy, look, I'm not blaming you, but America needs to know the truth. God does exist, and I think you believe in God. And I think you have a moment here just to clear yourself. Not blaming you, and I would never encourage the population to be angry at you, but you have a chance here to clear clear the slate. Just tell the truth one time, straight up. And again, Buzz has slipped several times. Buzz has an interview he did, as I remember it, I think it was like some Arizona news agency. This video you can't find anymore, and the Jeranism guy's got it embedded in one of his videos, but I just nothing you can do to get a hold of that guy. But it was Buzz Aldrin being interviewed at night about going to Mars. And he's just having fun with the interview, and he says a line live on television. He says, well, once we figure out how to go to the moon, it'll be a lot easier to get to Mars. And they're like, what? Interview's cut off. The cover story was that, he didn't mean to say the moon. He was talking about something else. He misspoke. Oh, really? Where else could he have gone? Once we get to I.O., we can get, no, he said the right thing. And let me just reiterate for you, okay? We have all these rovers on Mars, supposedly, right? Which we don't, okay? We don't. Just give it up. They were never supposed to last that long, but it's a cash cow, right? We have to clean solar panels off constantly with scrubbers when there's just so much of a little attrition of wind and rain. We have to clean them off because they don't even work anymore. But those solar panels on Mars, no problem at all, right? And a little helicopter flew in 1% atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose it's moving 100 times faster RPM on the blade. But if you're going to make a rover technology, okay, where would you test it first? I'm just asking for a friend. If you and I built a wild car that ran off of like apple juice or something, would our first trip to ever test this vehicle be to go from LA to New York on the interstate highways? Probably not. We'd probably go to a big parking lot, if not our driveway, if not our backyard, and try it out before we blow it completely across the United States. Unlike Stan Myers, who successfully did it on 3 gallons of water. Go see that episode, Stan Meyer. They would have sent it to the moon. They would have sent it to the moon. Would they? I mean, gosh, if you have solar panel energy systems, little wings off the side, my gosh, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Nope, they sent it to Mars. And guess what? No problems. The only problem they ever had with Mars is 1998, right? They did one 93, I think, 98, and that one had a what was it, metric to imperial conversion problem in the software. The 1998 thing feels like to me, and let me just tell you, okay, so one of the girls I dated for 2.5 years was a tester on the Tomahawk missile system. She spent, I don't even know how many years on this system. I think it was around 8 years. She was a tester, okay? And it was all above board by the time I met her, so she didn't give me any like secret information. But when she was trying to educate our company on what it was going to take to test the tax software with automated test tools, which she was an expert at, she lamented about the test protocols for any type of hardware like that. The simulations are just ad nauseum, right? Of course, the cover story for 98 was they tried to save money. Guarantee running the software between the units would have been the cheapest thing you could do. And you don't even need the units to be in the room. You can simulate all the units in emulators on computers. The idea that they had an imperial to metric conversion problem is just for stupid people, okay? There's no way on earth that would have been the problem. My suspicion is that the photos weren't ready. They plan a launch. JPL's trying to like provide the images. So NASA provides a rocket. JPL provides the imagery, which is exactly how the Mars missions work. And they basically pulled the plug on it before it landed. Not ready. I mean, they had just walked in the door the day of the image system having to be online for that rover to say it was on the surface, which is probably a mixture of real life action set somewhere in some underground bunker and the CG to pull it off. It would have been on TV and it wouldn't have been a failed launch. I told you the story a long time ago, but we're recapping here. I have been very blessed to work with almost every single hero of my cinematic life, okay? And computer life too, okay? Very famous people. Because of that, I've been invited to parties that only a group of people involved with those projects, legendary projects over the years, participated in, right? I'm a guest. Well, I got invited to San Diego. It was an alumni party of one of the biggest effects companies in the 70s that originally started doing CG stuff, right? Computer-generated artwork. And the whole staff of Tron from 1982 was there. They're just a piece of this group. In fact, they're almost nobody compared to, not nobody, but the group of people was probably maybe 12, and there's probably 100 people there, okay? Well, the place where we were having the party was on the rooftop of this restaurant, and that was closing down. So we had to go over to the hotel where one of the main guys had rented a suite. And something fabulous happened because his room wasn't ready, and it was just a normal suite, and he got upgraded to the penthouse suite, and it was 2 floors. Unbelievable. And so we're downtown San Diego in the middle of the night. So I find myself on a balcony with these 2 dudes, and I don't know who they are. And they were 2 animators from Tron. Tron's the first computer-generated movie in history, and is the first movie for 10 years following that movie to have live-action people mixed with CG in the same shot. I believe the first time it was done to any notable level was 1992 with Terminator 2. We had stuff like Last Starfighter, but if you pay attention to Last Starfighter, it's either a CG shot or it's a live action shot, never mixed together. Little trivia for you. But I'm talking to these 2 dudes, and I said, well, who are you guys? And they said, oh, we're from this company that worked on Tron. I said, whoa, really? And so we get in this conversation, and I'm asking them all kinds of questions, you know. I know some of the answers, but I want to hear them talk about it. And so it was like, how do you convert CG to film, you know? And they said, well, we got a big high-res television, and we put a cloak over it and blacked out the room, and we just went 1 frame at a time and basically did single exposures onto film for every single frame that we rendered. And that's the movie that you see. I was like, wow, unbelievable. But then I asked the question. I said, well, surely you went on to work on the blockbuster movies after that had tons of CG. I mean, you guys are the original dudes, right? Were you involved with Pixar, Digital Domain? Did you help create Abyss? I mean, like, did you work on Last Starfighter? And they were just the most chippery kind of guys, man. And they were like, no, we went to go work for JPL. Oh, that's weird. Now we're in San Diego. JPL's in Pasadena. I said, well, what did you do for JPL? And they said, we created 3D terrain simulation software for 15 years, somewhere like that, right? At least 15 years. And I was like, what? Terrain software? Why would you do that? I don't know. I said, was it because of like scanning from satellites and you want to turn it in? No, we're just simulation software for terrains. Now you can buy this stuff today. Terragen is a great application. You can get a free copy and have Mars on your computer in 2 seconds with clouds and all. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's just phenomenal, right? And I said, well, how good is it? And they said, well, by the time we left, if you have memory and processor power, you can do every grain of sand, is I think the analogy they gave me. I was like, whoa, really? And so I am on this balcony with just these two dudes. It's a big balcony, okay? But it's just the three of us. When I say big, it's like 10 by 20. So I keep looking back through the glass door because we're just talking. I'm just looking around. And there's this weird dude who's got like white hair. He looks almost albino, but he's not. He is white as a ghost. He's got like an Edward Scissorhands outfit on. I mean, he's black with all these weird flaps and weird stuff. I mean, not literally, but it was like, what are you doing, dude? You trying to look for a fancy dress party? But he also had all these weird silver rings all over his hand with the cocaine ring, right? With the little tip off the thing. I mean, why these people wear that shit, I don't know. Really, like, totally nerdy dude. Glasses, just teleported right out of 75, put a Dune outfit on, okay? And they eventually, where I said, well, you know, did anyone else go with you? And they go, well, it was us two, and that guy right there. And they pointed at that dude who's like literally smoking a cigarette, trying to keep one ear towards the screen door to hear what we're talking about. Because I'm asking questions. He doesn't join the conversation. Any human being on planet Earth, he's a little nomad walking around the party with no friends apparently. He should have said, oh yeah, and he should have slid the door open. Hey, yeah, I was there, and talk about it, put his little stink on it, right? Nope, that dude booked out of our view. Never saw the guy that night ever again. The conversation was pretty much done, but later on my math started working in my brain. Okay, what'd I tell you about 2010: A Space Odyssey? Jupiter was fully rendered in 3D. Done. Ready for a movie. Ready for a cinematic movie plus a deformation of the surface of Jupiter because that's what the story required. But don't you think that stuff was ready for the Voyager pictures when they needed it? It's a fantasy for JPL faking bodies in space, right? Think about the 1993 landing. Well, that's probably live action set with a little rover on there. Didn't drive that far. But now we're getting somewhere, aren't we? Well, that was 1982 when that movie released. They said they immediately were over there. So let's give them until 1993 to start. Add 20 years. You're at 2003. Okay. Well, did computers get slower or faster? They got a lot faster. A lot faster, okay? There's a little video card company out there that makes GPUs. Very famous. Nancy Pelosi makes a lot of money off of them. I'm going to tell you right now, that's government sector stuff making it into the private sector, right? Those chips are being handed out to us to help with the big render farms and that kind of stuff, right? Those cards, plus companies like Silicon Graphics, were ready to go. And Predator machines, Sun Microsystems making mini computers with, 16 processors on them. And by the late 80s, it was just nuts. I went into a VR room in 1992 at Sun Microsystems because I was I was best friends of a person that was McNeely's assistant. He was the president with one other guy. I met McNeely a bunch of times in the Bay Area. It's really weird. Dairy Queen, especially with his family. I was like kind of a weird acquaintance friend with him. Strange, just how my life went. But I saw like a VR system that surrounded me completely. I just put on active glasses. I saw fish going by me. I was in a swamp at night with lightning storm. It was like total photoreal because it was using silhouettes instead of detailed renderings. All live, man. And there was one point where there was a lathe in front of me that was like a fake piece of wood in my hand. I could reach my hand out and it was tracking where my hand was in the room, and I could lathe the wood with my hand. 1992, man. Crazy. Haven't you seen the movies lately? How realistic everything is. I mean, Godzilla looks like he lives somewhere in our world. Pacific Rim, all the oceans are all rendered. I mean, you've seen it. You can just name your movie. Avatar, all these movies. Avatar is almost photoreal inside Unreal when James Cameron's filming it in the studio. Mars is most likely completely a mixture of CG worlds, which they got this delay between us and Mars, right? So the little intern from Aerospace Technology says, I moved the rover 10 feet forward. We're going to see what happens. Well, it's either a model and some sand in some underground film studio, or it could just be a CG thing. It takes, 15 minutes to send the signal, 15 minutes to get it back. And so they got 30 minutes to render whatever they need, frame for frame. And hey, if they got a problem with the computers, that transmission didn't work. There must be a coronal mass ejection that's flying around the universe, preventing you from getting the frames that you need. Oh, when the little hands reach out and grab rocks and slice things in half, well, that could either be CG or it could be some real thing that we found on Earth that looks kind of Marsy, right? People in Greenland are convinced it's fake because their vistas are being presented by NASA as Mars. They're like, that's my backyard. And oh yeah, all those vehicles are all NASA vehicles roaming around. I've heard that Hawaii has the same issue on the Big Island, which has like out of this world vistas. The Big Island of Hawaii has every single climate that the world can offer anyone, from deserts to Arctic areas. It's really intense because it's such a wild volcanic surface. At least that's what I've been told. I will tell you that there's 3 different states of life you can live in with the moon missions. There's the life I lived, probably up until about 2000, where you believe it. I was even told in 91 we didn't go, and a bunch of facts about it, but I didn't know how to discern those facts. So there's this excitement that you have every time a NASA event occurs. You're excited, right? And you do feel this like thing for mankind. Look what we did, right? I understand that because I was there for almost 30 years of my life, okay? Probably at least 30 years of my life. 21 uninterrupted, okay? Then there's the phase you go into when you are starting to open your mind a little bit and you're starting to take the data in. I just happen to have lived a really wild life, and I've been pulled into lots of rooms to talk to really special people. Because of my acumen, I've been working with some of these people as a career partner or a boss. I've seen stuff that's not supposed to exist, okay? All right. And then there's that third stage where you've now completed enough of the smoking guns that you are on board. And then you have to take all of your rudimentary interpretations of the smoking guns and take them to that next level, right? Which I'm starting to call the theoretical level, where you can actually study some of the scientific implications of what they claimed. And then it's this whole new epiphany. It's like a whole new rebirth of, it's not a question of whether we didn't go. We didn't go. But let's look at how brilliant the hoax was and how silly the hoax was all at the same time. And how, because the intelligence required, especially in 69 to 72, we're not, they didn't teach computers in school unless you went to a really special school. They kind of did, but you'd have to be some eclectic kid to go, I want to be a computer scientist in 1965. What are you going to do? Work for the government? Some big giant corporation with a crappy Wayne computer or something? Right? They were infinitesimal machines. And I don't think I have to tell you, the subtext of the entire process is to reinterpret a lot of things. How do you take in information? Do you just swallow stuff without discerning it? Well, we all do when we're young. There's no guilt trip, man. You're not supposed to be lied to by certain organizations. You're not. There's actually laws that say they're not supposed to lie to you, but they do. You know, when you eat food, you think that it's healthy. You think that the ingredients in there could never have something that's not supposed to be in there. Well, just a little tiny conspiracy. They could put weird junk in your food and make you sick. They don't have to put it on the outside of the box, do they? It's a conspiracy that's against you. But you don't want to go nuts with that stuff, even though there are a lot of folks conspiring against you. You know, it's just a bummer, right? But what's beautiful about it is once you start kind of accepting this and you don't cry in your pillow at night, there's this enlightenment level that you'll reach where you actually have tools from a moon mission thing that will help you with everything else you have in life. And you don't need to panic and you don't need to go crazy and you won't even want to call your relatives, right? That's the other big one is the second you find out something, you call 10 guys. Did you know this? Did you know that? That's an early bird pattern that you get into. But once you calm down, you're good. But I will warn you, there are conspiracies out there that are designed to shut down your brain. We had a comment, and I understand this comment very, very deeply, and I respect the comment. But I got someone that said, look, there's just a firmament above you, and that's it. End of story. Okay, well, that can come from a couple different places, right? That can come from the biblical background. I respect that. It's probably not the truth, but I respect it. And then there's this recent phenomenon from 2015 that redefines the shape of the earth, okay? There's been a lot of funny, fancy theories that, you know, I'll just give you like a wild one. And I just did one called Shadow Beings. This is even down from that into more science fiction. But imagine an alien race that lives in a spectrum of light that you can't see. There's been Star Trek episodes. I was thinking one, I think it was Next Generation, where there were these beings that got onto the Enterprise and everyone started having these headaches. And I think it was Picard that kept having this headache. And headaches aren't something you have in that futuristic 24th century world. And so Beverly Crusher was trying to figure out why the captain kept having a headache. But a bunch of people were reporting headaches and weird neurological issues. And what they found out was that there was a group of aliens on the ship living in a frequency of light that you couldn't see, that were attaching these things to all these people on the ship, not intending to do any harm, but it was doing harm. And eventually somebody figures out how to do it, probably Data, someone figured out how to trigger something so they could see them. And all of a sudden they're humanoid, you know, they looked very human. And of course, Picard's pissed. He's had this freaking, you know, nightmare of a headache for at least a week or something. It's screwing up his ability to do his job. And he finally kicks them off the ship, but they apologize profusely before they leave, right? But that was something living in the shadows of a frequency that you couldn't see. There was a Doctor Who episode that there was a monster. It was it Matt Smith's first episode, I believe, where if you looked 90 degrees, you could see this monster out of your peripheral vision, but if you looked that way, you couldn't see it. And it was this thing living in the shadows, okay? Why am I talking about this in a Moon episode? Well, if I could condition your mind with a conspiracy using true facts which don't really associate with science deeply, however I do it doesn't really matter. If I could show you a commercial and just like Looker, it hypnotizes you and tells you something that goes into your subconscious, and all of a sudden they change you as a human being. They would like you to do nothing more than abstract away technology that really exists that's being used potentially not for your benefit. Like not believing that something could be in orbit around the Earth, right? Just be careful about one thing. Don't let your brain ever get closed off, right? What's the big joke about school today? From K through 12 and all the way through college. You go in as an open-minded child and all they do is close the doors on you. This is this way. This is not that way. Light travels at one speed, even though every time it's measured, it's some different speed. Even though that medical institutions have figured out that things happen on a protein level at twice the speed of light, right? I don't know why people venture out with closed minds. Are they trying to find more videos with closed-minded people to talk about how closed-minded they are? You know, what's the point? Are we all closed-minded in here? Well, is that one guy over there is not closed-minded? Get that guy It's mob rules through sheer ignorance, right? Know that groups are paid to do this to you. They are related to government agencies, and they're related to people that are hired by government agencies, and probably some agencies that just think they're the government, right? I see it. It worries me. In the end, we're all probably good. No matter what matrix we're in, we're probably okay. The game is to see how much you can use your brain before this instance of your existence is gone, right? So give it some thought. Hopefully you dug this. I think I've hit 2 hours over there. Please understand these episodes take quite a while to edit. The last one took me 2 weeks, and there's still mistakes in the overlays. I swear to God, I check it all and I miss a few. If you dig the moon stuff, definitely treat yourself to the old episodes. I mean, it's what this channel is really known for. So just go to deepthoughtsradio.com. There's all kinds of categories on the website, but one of the big ones is NASA, moon missions. You probably dig the alien ones too. Just understand the show, I've designed the episodes to work with each other over time, right? And know that we don't do anything that's kind of silly. We do things that's always pretty intense, okay? First season's very raw. It doesn't get really underway until about halfway through. But episode 26 has the most views ever. 165, I think, is the next top episode. Those are both moon episodes, right? We got tons of moon episodes. Definitely check the list that says removed by YouTube, because they have taken down at least 40 episodes off of YouTube, okay? And those are probably episodes that have information that might be beneficial to you, depending on your interest in this world. Anyway, check out the website, audio, video, a new store through Etsy. So there's going to be some new shirts that are related to moon stuff in general. So those will be fun to put on and wear, I guarantee it, because you're going to start some conversations with those bad boys, and the evidence is going to be right on your chest, okay? It'll be great, right? I'll try to get some of those out before I air this episode. But anyway, to the Patreon, PayPal folks, thank you so much and make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.